Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in just a second here. Okay, everybody. Welcome to the session today. I think we can go ahead and get started. My name is Elisa Turner. I'm from the RightBound team, and I'll be your host for today. If you're here to learn about or discuss automation and how it can impact or maybe has already impacted your revenue team this year, you're in the right spot. Before I intro our guests for today, just a couple housekeeping items. Today's session is going to run just about an hour. During the first portion, we're going to meet our guests. We're going to learn a little bit about their backgrounds and what they're working on at their respective organizations. And then during the last half, we're going to open it up for questions and discussion. Feel free to drop any questions or comments that you have throughout the session. In the chat, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat and posing them to our speakers throughout the session. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce first Terry Husayn, VP of Sales Dev at Orum. Hey, Terry.
Hey, how's it going? My name is Husayn. I'm on the VP Sales Dev over here at Orum. I'm also recently transitioned into CS, the VP of Technical Engagement, really heavily focused on making our customers successful in their SDR orgs, just as we had done internally. And I've also, done over 200 plus deployments of Orum and spoken to hundreds of SDR organizations. So this is definitely a topic that's, top of everyone's mind, and super excited to chat about it today.
Awesome. Thanks for joining. Our other guest is my colleague, Gal Gan-El, who's our VP of Customer Success at RightBound. Hey, Gal.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Alicia. Gal Gan-El, VP of Customer Success and Support here at RightBound. My main focus is to make sure, of course, that our customers are successful with RightBound, making sure that they get the ROI that they are expecting to get, and make sure that they establish processes using RightBound. And I'm super excited to have this webinar today.
Awesome. Terry, so can you kind of kick us off today and kind of talk about some things that are going on at Orum as it pertains to, I guess, automation or AI for your rev teams?
Yeah, sure. I can go over a quick, brief overview. So really at Orum, our focus is delivering live conversations, really automating a lot of the manual processes around, getting into these conversations and being effective. This can comprise of using AI to connect you to live prospects. It's also grown into things like analytics and being able to train, teams on a virtual sales floor, as well as starting to expand into data as well. Very similar to RightBound, the goal is to really automate as much as possible so that we can have the human being who's driving it really capture the most amount of value out of their day and just drive more customer interaction.
Awesome. Sounds great. And Gal, what are we up to at RightBound?
So RightBound is a sales automation platform for the outbound development teams that can do both the autonomous prospecting and the outreach optimization. For the autonomous prospecting, we fully automate the research process. We are sourcing the right accounts and the right contacts based on the customer ICP, and we enrich them with verified emails, phone numbers, and direct phone numbers. In other words, we find the right people with the right data. And the other aspect is the outreach optimization. We segment and prioritize the prospects based on the target market. We work with the marketing teams in order to compose the right emails. We send emails on behalf of our customers while we are engaging gifting platforms, survey platforms, social media. In other words, we warm up the leads, and this is where Orum is getting into the picture because these leads are ready to be called.
Awesome. So Terry, I'm going to pick on you first. I think for our discussion, you kind of brought up that human element. And I think maybe this goes for everyone. You can't really get on LinkedIn these days without seeing like some post or some article about being worried about like AI tools replacing the human element. What advice do you have for people who are worried about things like this being replaced in the sales process?
I think it's a pertinent topic. What we're seeing across hundreds of SDR organizations that I speak to, it's not so much that the SDRs are being replaced or that reps are being replaced. It's really about being human at scale. So for example, if you're to look at our technology, we're delivering live conversations, but who's actually having that conversation? And so it's really about enhancement and efficiency gains, versus like Luddite fears. We're not throwing printing presses into the river, right? The individual contributors have to adapt and use AI to accelerate their own productivity. And now, one of the things that I think is really key for managers, business owners, as well as individual contributors is to understand both the business side and the sales rep side. And first, business side first, which should get anyone in this space, like especially people on the front line, super excited, is CAC, customer acquisition costs. Typically, when you see downturns as you're seeing now, most companies will throw the baby out with the bathwater. They'll actually, downsize their SDR team. They might get rid of their SDR team entirely. That's because their customer acquisition costs are quite high for most of those teams. The reason being is because their SDR teams aren't actually efficient. And so being able to automate the vast majority of those manual time-consuming tasks that aren't actually driving revenue will allow SDRs and sales reps to drive more revenue with less. And so if I was to say in short, for anyone that is worried, the best thing that you can do right now is to learn your tool sets. The ability of a rep to fully understand their tool sets, deploy them deeply, and automate their day using that tech stack is actually going to be a greater determination of output compared to their sales skills. And that's something that has not been, that's going to be the new norm going forward. And that's something that was not the case for the last 20, 30, 40 years of software selling.
Awesome. Gal, any thoughts?
Actually, we do see SDR that are using ChatGPT or GPT, whatever, AI in order to help them address the right prospect with the right message. And this is something that, we should see how we can utilize these AI tools that currently pop up and use them in order to be more successful, in order to reach to the right people. As Terry mentioned, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that there is a human being making the phone call, talking to the end user or to the prospect, and this cannot be replaced by any tool.
So what you're saying is there's nothing to worry about, right?
Now,
so that kind of leads me to my next question. You talk about tools a lot. What does a good tool look like? How do you go about kind of shopping tools and making sure that something's going to be the right fit before, you spend your precious dollars and time investing in these tools? Anybody?
Yeah, I can start. I think first off, you really should spend more time determining what the problem is before going out and looking for a tool. I think what I fall into this trap many times where I immediately start solutioning any problem. And usually that problem has a deeper set of roots, right? So first, really depends on your pain points and also who your ideal customer profile is. So for example, with AI, as I mentioned with RightBound, like everyone's going to have prospecting automation problems. There's a lot of clicks and a lot of copying and pasting that still exists today. And with standard tech stacks, it's also about how far have you deployed them. So for example, if you think about your sales engagement platforms that stand out, like the Outreach, the SalesLoft, the Apollos of the world, the Grus, they have a lot of capabilities, but most teams are not fully utilizing those capabilities that might actually allow them to not have to get another vendor. And if they find that they cannot get that output, then it's time to go look, at a vendor. But, if you actually deeply look at most tech tools that you're using today, unless it's a very specific pain point, you might be able to solve it internally. If not, you got to prioritize it. And that's the second piece. If there was one thing that I could tell every SDR or VP of sales or just every sales leader is, when's the last time that you BPM mapped? And what I mean is, it's called business process mapping. Did you actually sit down and draw an entire chart of every click that your rep has to do for the various tasks, whether it's drafting a proposal, whether it's adding a prospect off LinkedIn and getting them into a sequence, and or where the conversation notes are going, how much manual activity is there. It's a great practice. 99% of orgs don't do it or have never done it, but that will actually show you, where those pain points are and what might need to be solved by an actual tool or by an internal process. And then if you think about it, in 2018, thanks to David Delaney over at Tenbound, he has essentially a sales map of all the tools. There were 100 vendors, 100 in 2018. There are over 2,000 in 2023. So good, it's great to put good tool in quotation marks, because first you have to determine what the pain is. And then if there's a vendor out there today, there is most likely a vendor that is solving some sort of pain point that you currently have. And if you are going to go engage them, that's another way where, you should be looking for trials and ways to test before you go ahead, as you mentioned, and actually commit to an actual contract.
Gal, I'm curious from a CS perspective, if you think the responsibility falls on the customer success team to kind of help drive that adoption, like that full usage of tools, as Terry was mentioning.
Yes, of course. Starting from the onboarding phase till the very end of the process, which never ends. The job of the CSMs is to make sure that our customers are successful, that they do get the value that they are expected to get. I would say that the most important thing here is to try this tool, to ask for a POC or a trial. I think that most of the tool currently support a short free trial. Make sure that you do have KPIs that agreed on both sides, the vendor side and the customer side, and make sure that you measure these KPIs. And then by the end of the trial period or by the end of the POC, you sit down together, conclude the POC, and make sure that this is the right tool for you. I think that this has to be done with more than one tool in order to find the right one, but definitely this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I can touch on that a little bit. I completely agree, Gal, like especially in this time right now where you see people who are, either condensing their vendors or, again, like going through some tough times, like you need to be able to do a proof of concept. And many people get confused between what a free trial is and what like a POC is. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Gal. Like a POC is where the customer success team of that vendor is going to, really provide that white glove service so that when you have agreed to that desired outcome, measurable via KPIs, as you mentioned, that actually back into the revenue goals that you have, that those CS teams are going to deliver before you actually purchase. And if a vendor isn't willing to do a full POC in today's environment or in general at all in order to show you that desired outcome, then I would walk away, right? You want to make sure that you're able to do that. And to your point, you want to test out typically more than one vendor so that you can at least A/B test, those results before, committing to a purchase. And everyone should see that on their end too. If you're a vendor today and you don't have a real strong POC process, like you should be investing there, because that's really what's going to be your differentiator, is showing whether or not, your software can actually deliver.
I think that one of the most important KPI that need to be measured is not only the tool functionality, but also how the tool affect processes, satisfaction of the people that are going to use it, not less important than the actual solution that the tool is going to provide. We do see that customers that choose RightBound solution choose it not just because of the product abilities or functionality, also because of the fact that the tool can somehow change internally processes or help to establish processes. And this is one thing that we need to remember. This has great impact on the decision of most of the sales teams that they decide to move to automation tool. And we need to remember to add it to the KPIs.
Awesome. Terry, if I can ping it back to you, how do you justify the budget? I think that's kind of like on people's minds. So what does that process look like? Can you offer some best practices for maybe approaching your leadership team? Like once you A/B tested and decided this is what we want to go with, how do you pitch that?
Yeah, I mean, more than ever now, you're selling to the CFO. And the CFO is going to look at, I'm going through this, I've gone through this many times. And, you have to have those desired outcomes and you have to have that measurable data. And then as Gal mentioned too, like if you go to a CFO and you don't factor in change management or how internal processes will change so that you could take advantage of the ROI and it not become shelfware, those are the sort of questions that CFOs are going to have more now than ever, because CFOs right now are going through that process. They're going through with a scalpel and they're saying, hey, we bought this tool. It may have achieved an outcome actually at a certain point, but is it still achieving it? And how are you guys measuring the impact of this tool that you bought? And if you don't have direct ROI measurements and your CSMs at those companies aren't able to help you quantify the investment, you might actually like the tool and your team might like it, but it still might get cut. So inversely, if you're looking to buy a new solution, you need to approach this with a business objective, and it has to be the same way that you would expect a vendor to sell to you, which is everything needs to back into revenue, everything needs to be measurable, attainable, and you have to factor in the change management and what that change management will do. Because I think as Gal mentioned, some of the best practices that you get by leveraging automation has a greater impact on the org than sometimes the tool itself. So for example, over here at Orum, like in order for us to be effective, people have to have very effective call dispositions, or they should have very effective call training strategies. There are many customers that have no call training that we have to help them with. And that means that even if they were to not buy Orum after the POC, like they're still going to be in a better spot because they should be doing that anyway. And that's quantifiable. So if you can have all of those in there and then show that you've had consistent usage and adoption throughout the POC and that will continue so that the business impact will continue, CFOs are going to be more readily available to release that budget. But everything has to be squeaky clean. If it's not, you're going to have a really tough time.
Yeah. And we need to be careful when we communicate ROIs, because the ROIs are different for each one of the stakeholders or the people that are going to use the tool. For the manager, the ROI can be time saving or can be efficiency. But for the end user, the SDR in our case, automation is a threat. Automation tool is a threat. They don't like automation tool that can be replace them. We need to communicate a different ROI. SDRs can accelerate, can achieve more, can be happier using our tools. We do know that the turnover rate for SDRs is almost 60%. It's really hard to be an SDR. It's really hard to come to the office every day and search the prospect that might be potential customers. And definitely this is not what they want to do, not where they want to be. Using our automation tools will provide food on their plates, and they will be able to focus on the part of the job that will help them to develop their skills, the sales skills, and be more successful.
Great. I think that is a good transition into a DM question that I got. I do want to go ahead and open up the floor to anybody who wants to join. This is kind of a virtual lunch style. I want to hear from you all. There are some familiar faces in the crowd. So if you do want to participate, go ahead and throw up a hand or send me a DM. I can unmute you guys and everybody can kind of join in and weigh in on what's going on at your organization or what you're seeing out in the universe. But the question is, how do you measure the more intangible, like more qualitative KPIs?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at qualitative KPIs, you can actually tend to look at how they actually affect bottom line revenues. So for example, when you think about the amount of time that a rep is spent, let's say prospecting, right? Reps will spend anywhere from 3 to 4 hours a day prospecting, or let's say calling and not like connecting to someone, or manually sending emails. I mean, there's still orgs out there that manually send and remind emails versus using a sales engagement platform. You can quantify that, but then you also have to look at like their happiness and their growth, right? So like, for example, qualitative outputs that might turn into objective outputs might be like, hey, what is your SDR turnover rate, right? If you do exit interviews on your SDRs, do they mention that they were chronically stressed, clicking around and confused? That of course leads to bottom line revenue, right? Is retainment of your SDRs and how happy they are. If SDRs are happy, they're also going to have time back to actually start progressing within your organization. The SDRs, for example, if we're focusing on them, is the bench for the rest of the revenue organization. Where do you think your top solutions consultants, your top sales engineers, your top CSMs come from? They come from usually the SDR frontline, and they're really hungry to move up. They don't have time to learn those skills, right? So that's like qualitatively, like their own personal growth can turn into, revenue later on. And that can, be quantified eventually. So like qualitative is kind of a misnomer, because at the end of the day, like there are enough functions within your typical organization, from HR, recruiting, to across the different revenue organizations, to see, what the impact is of making reps happier.
Awesome. Friend of the I guess event show that we do, Moss Jacobson, just tapped into the conversation. Hey Moss, great to see you again.
Hey Alyssa, thanks for calling on me. I'm going to echo what Terry said. First and foremost, I think rep happiness is it's just underchecked across most sales organizations today. And I think that if you have an opportunity to use some sort of employee engagement tool or platform to measure that, again, I know it's going back to something that is quantitative, but it comes through in the conversations. Like I can hear it. If my rep is not happy, I can hear it. Same thing if I'm taking sales calls from, someone who's calling on me. I can tell if someone's just going through the rote motions, or they actually have a passion and they believe in what they're doing and they're selling, and that they're thrilled to have this conversation. And that brings me to my second point, is something that's not measurable, is to work with SDRs on their storytelling. We all have these soft skill sets that are associated with how we can be better salespeople. And I think that storytelling is also one of those underutilized skills. For some people, it comes more naturally. For others, it's something that needs to be practiced. But I think that everyone can work on that. And I lean on some of my executive leaders to help me with that. So they become the audience for my sales team, and then I get feedback from the C-suite on, because they're potential customers. And then I can work with my reps to help train them, whether it be gathering the stories from other team members from our engineering team, or just coming up with the storyline, repeating it, practicing. It's a lot like acting. So
Right.
That's just something that we've been working on.
I want to add to it. We do see that customers that are more mature, that they do have sales processes in place, they do have experiences, managers are more successful with the RightBound or with any automation tool, comparing to teams where they have young managers, young SDRs, there are no sales processes in place. We see the difference, and we encourage our customers to make sure that we are part of their sales process. If there is no sales process, we are trying to build together with them the sales process based on our product abilities, or based on our product outputs. And we do see them successful, but definitely we see the difference.
Yeah, I'll say the same thing. I mean, when I go on customer calls and actually listen to the SDRs having live conversations with prospects, you can tell which SDRs are in it to win it, and which ones might be unhappy or maybe not fit for the role. It depends. Some people get into the SDR role thinking that it's going to be one thing when it turns out to be another, and being able to identify that, because sometimes you're actually hiring people who have really great skill sets and they might be actually used in another part of the organization. And for those that have really great skill sets, are they getting the coaching? Are they getting the process changes needed so that they can actually get the most out of their work? That's where a lot of organizations fall flat. And, every organization has a part of this, within them where they're not 100% in tune with those on the front lines, especially those in work from home environments, right? Like, I think that's a huge thing that's been going on in tech. And the difference between being on a sales floor and having your manager come over after hearing a great call, or the opposite, or seeing that you're off a little bit and pulling you aside and saying, hey, is everything okay? Like, that human element is missing to a certain degree. And so I think, to your point, Moss, like, it's a problem that existed before, but it's been a little bit exacerbated. And we're seeing that, especially in terms of burnout rates. It's definitely higher than ever, especially when we look at SDR turnover rates, but we look at burnout rates in general across the organizations. Everyone is doing more with less, and that's where the automation needs to come in, and saying that they don't have the resources. Automation should allow them to do more with less in a good way.
Yeah, it's kind of a conflict. The companies are trying to keep their most important resource, which are people. But from the other hand, the job or the work itself is so frustrating that these people are leaving, and then there is no one to do the work. We do see the resistance bottom up. We do see the SDR resist to follow the processes. We do see them resist using the tools. When they are doing the manual job, when they are searching or prospecting manually, they do develop kind of a emotional sentiment to those prospects that they could find themselves. And it's meaningless. I mean, the time that they spend on prospecting manually is meaningless. There is no value. It's a waste of time. But for some reason, they do feel they do have this sentiment, and this is, the behavior that need to be changed. Definitely, an automation tool can change this perception, but it's really hard to change this behavior. This brings me back to the fact that experienced managers, more mature managers, or mature sales processes can be successful with automation tools. For those that are not, they need to build the processes around it.
Gal, I'm curious if you, or Terry, or anybody really, if you think some of the resistance to adopt new processes and new automation is kind of like, maybe not consciously, but an attempt to like save their job, where they think, oh, like, I'm being outsourced to ChatGPT, for example. If I don't use it, then maybe they can't replace me. Do you think that's perhaps a factor?
I mean, I'm curious to hear from the attendees, but I would say that I haven't seen that on my end across other organizations. It's really breaking bad habits and bad processes before they set in. And so, that's really why, on the SDR organizations, people try to hire on the younger end. They try to hire someone who's going to be more coachable. I think it doesn't matter how old you are. If you're coachable, you're coachable. And so coachability, if it's not there, they're going to fall back to whatever mode they were in when they hit quota. And what organizations and even individual contributors need to understand too is quota goes up, resources go up, and that when you actually buy a tool, experienced managers will increase quota typically 10x, 20x the cost of the tool, which might actually end up only being 1 or 2 additional meetings per week. But if you look at that on a per week basis, per monthly basis, that could be a significant increase depending on what that baseline is. So I've always seen it as that it's both on the CS and product side as well. Many of the times, like, for them to learn the new tool and actually institute it into their process without it breaking little things that they were doing manually, that takes time. And it takes you have to mature with the tool itself and actually give it time to set in. Usually SDR, if it stops working or they don't get a hang of it, even in the first few days, they tend to drop it, even though it will literally save them, a quarter to half of their day. And that's been probably the most surprising thing that anyone on CS probably knows, is that a customer will buy your tool, you'll actually deliver the desired outcome through a POC. But then months later, you'll see usually a drop off in usage because of SDR churn. Like if the SDRs are getting promoted, so your best SDRs are getting promoted into the rest of the organization, and the SDRs that weren't a fit are gone, and then you're left with the new batch of people that are entering that you need to train and get them on the speed. So if that process, the original processes that were there did not get changed, and now they're given this tool where it still hasn't set in, that's the constant battle that anyone on customer success is feeling today that I've seen.
Kind of hot take here from the audience. Emma Johnson says, I feel like SDRs might be scared of new tech because there's accountability in the tech. The company can see the KPIs and know if you're working from home or not. The good SDRs want the tech. Anyone can weigh in here.
Again, it's what you want to do, as part of your job description. If you want to prospect manually and burn yourself, of course there is a resistance, but the job or the role of the manager is to communicate to the team, and as Terry mentioned, to make sure that the team is following the processes that are more meaningful and provide the ROI that the team wants to see. Again, it's the job of the manager to make sure that the team following the processes and using the tools. Yeah, this is the toughest part of the SDR manager's job.
Yeah, having managed SDR teams and been an SDR myself, and I was lucky when I was at RightScale, I was surrounded by like really fantastic other SDRs that had come from college or really intelligent, and so I got to see like what a really solid SDR organization is when everyone's great, and the competitiveness there was incredible. And then I've been at I even led my own teams where I hired some A players, some B players, and some people that weren't a fit. At the end of the day, you shouldn't have to micromanage, but a lot of these tool sets, because again, we go back to the CFO example, because vendors are the ones that are taking on more and more risk to deploy the outcome, which is a good move, right? It's business for business. It's a great book if you guys ever want to read on this change. That they need to actually ensure that their revenue and their outcome is visible to the buyer, which means that the activity and the outcome of the individual user has to be visible in the software platform. So that's why accountability is being built in the tech. I think it's a great question that you asked, Emma, and a good point is that the great SDRs want that. They want that visibility because they want that coaching. They want to know that they're on the right path. And so if people are averse to any technology that has accountability, like that's definitely a red flag, because in 2023, and I think the decade that follows, it's going to be transformative for any SDR or individual contributor that can understand how to deploy their own connected SaaS systems further so that they can be more effective and also be more strategic. It's really a future where SDRs should be thinking more critically about the way that their messaging is landing, the types, how they can get better on having live conversations, and how they can better automate their day. It should not be about, how do I get back to manual processes? It should be anything that's not driving like the main core focus of what my job is a distraction and should be automated. And that's a battle that you see everywhere. But if you don't do it, there's a competitor that's going to be out in a year or two that's going to have similar functionality. And if they're doing it, like you're going to fall behind, right? Like we're in a hyper competitive landscape, and that competitiveness is only increasing.
Terry, I'm glad, this is Moss again. I'm glad you said earlier on in your answer there that you worked as an SDR first. I'm going to make what could be a somewhat controversial statement. So all SDR managers should have been SDRs, but not all SDRs should be SDR managers. So I think that's important. And the reason I bring that up is because, and I'm a firm believer in sales tool automation. I'm experimenting with all different types of AI. I'm a big believer in helping the SDRs do their jobs better. But I also am a firm believer that I have to know that it works. Like I have to be able to go as Having been on the front lines before, I need to use the technology. Maybe I'm wrong. And so that feedback loop from the SDRs, it's not necessarily always on the shoulders of the SDRs. I think that sometimes we put a little too much reliance on the technology as opposed to the human element. You said that a little bit earlier, that AI is never going to completely replace the human element, but we need that feedback loop, at least from my perspective, from the team. And we can't be afraid to experiment with new things. And we also can't be afraid to say that we were wrong with the technology, just like we may say that we were wrong with a new SDR at their 90-day review.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, Orum came up with a great solution that is not going to replace the personal conversation. It's going to add the automation part for the entire process. And definitely, I mean, we need to keep the people. We need to make sure that they do have the interaction with the other people on the other side. There is no doubt here.
I want to circle back to a question Adam posed a little bit ago. So he says, the CEO of Outreach recently mentioned on LinkedIn that they'll be implementing ChatGPT into their services to help automate content generation. What other aspect of the sales process do you see being automated throughout this year?
So I'm going to chime in and even combine it with Tom's question, because they both go hand in hand, which is, we're going to see automation across the entire stack. We're going to see it from automated prospecting, there's automated intent, there's going to be, automated analytics and insights under the way that you write, right? For example, you might look at automated personalization with a Regi.ai, or, looking at tools like Lavender, which will give you insights on what emails are performing best, what words to use. It goes deeper than that, by the way. And so that's just in that portion. And then you have, for example, RightBound, which is automating the data capture and also the manual prospecting efforts, sending them in emails. And then you have automated dialing, you have automated follow-up. So we're going to see automation across the entire tech stack. And then in terms of, how this yields into some of the most time-consuming processes, right? So for example, personalizing emails is a huge time suck, but that there is a giant increase in open rates and reply rates. It's whether or not, the effort's worth it. And so what I hear all the time is people want to be strategic. And I put that in quotation marks because the irony here is they actually have not found a way to be strategic because they are spending a lot of time doing it, but they know that it's worth it. So for example, we have our SDRs attempt to personalize every first email they can, but most of the personalization is not going to be as effective as account-based personalization. So what research have you done in the company? What pain points do you know the company is going through? Because you can then use that across every email, right? So if you happen to see that there's a personalized reason to write a message, you absolutely should, but you're going to get very similar open and reply rates at actually identifying account-based pain, which could be used across everyone, right? And so, for example, one thing that you could do immediately, Tom, is you could actually create a field where people put in their account-based research. And it might, for example, on our team, what we do is we push that into every email being sent to that account. So it might be like, I saw you were hiring SDRs, you're using Outreach and Gong. We integrate with both of those to really enhance like your overall sales engagement process. That gets pasted in every email. Then they might personalize. So, that's where you can determine, where to automate, but still keep the human element so they have more time to ideally increase their capacity.
Okay. Is it even worth running a POC if we don't have the budget?
Yeah, you want to take this one and chime in too?
From our side as a vendors or from the customer? No, I'm just kidding. Yes, I think that it can help you to focus on the right solution. I think that it can help you to understand what you want to achieve with the new tool. Definitely, I know it's a waste of time. We are getting this request. We are spending a lot of time providing the service to customers that we are trying to understand if they do have the budget or not. But they come back to us. Most of them come back to us when they do have the budget and they have clear understanding of what they want to achieve. So I think that there are definitely yes.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, timing in, like, how else do you get budget? Like, there's no way to get budget unless you do a POC. So even if you have no budget, you know, frankly, if you have no budget and the vendor is willing to engage in a POC, like, take it, because they're the ones who are actually spending a lot of money and energy to determine whether or not, like, you're a fit. And then if you don't have the budget and you can't make budget with that desired outcome, you likely weren't going to buy it anyway, right? So budget does exist. CFOs do understand that business spending is meant to be unleashed, not restrained. However, they only want to unleash it on those that have, you know, proven the value. And so, you know, we run POCs all the time, even when there's no budget allocated, because you never know what you're going to find. If you end up finding that this tool increases your SDR's capacity by 100%, you know, the cost of the tool itself, you know, being, you know, maybe a few $100s a month or something like that, that alone is going to be worth it. And you know that you can invest in that now. You'll make budget for that because you'll see it transcend into revenue. So, you know, I think we don't give enough credit on both ends, the individual users, the vendors, as well as like the CFOs who are looking at this. If you present the right information and you've done your legwork, like, they're gonna do what they know affects bottom line revenue.
I'm curious if we can explore the timing of all of this. So, you know, not that automation is new by any means, but I think it's safe to say it's really ramped up, especially in the sales world the last 18 months or so. And at the same time, we've seen this like economic downturn and everyone's trying to do less with more. So wondering if you guys think that the move toward, like, the shift toward automation is like a necessity, or was it always going to happen? And this is just kind of a coincidence that now it's a priority.
I can say that we see that companies change their strategic decisions not to go for outbound, to go to find this prospect, to source this prospect, and to chase these prospects, versus the decision that were made a year ago or 6 months ago. They realize that no one actually knock on their doors and asking to buy, and they don't have any choice.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we started Orum, you know, almost 5 years ago, you know, we got a lot of traction, then COVID hit. And, you know, with COVID, there was massive changes. Certain industries just evaporated overnight. Very similar pain to now, but very different circumstances. And at that time, there was a huge push to automation, right? There was a push to automation in the workforce. There was a push to automation in terms of everyone working from home, right? Your kids were on Zooms. And so automation had, and the ability to digitally transform, you know, really sprung forward. But in my opinion, what I've seen is it was always going to happen. I think what makes this time very different is the vast nature of the automation that's currently available and how rapid this automation is being deployed. So up until now, it was incredibly rare to have AEs and SDRs that consistently performed at 2x the baseline of the team, right? In engineering, you actually have people who are 10x engineers, because engineers, they could be doing 10x the output as another engineer, right? And you don't typically see that in sales. And what you're seeing now is that the SDRs, even the best SDRs across hundreds of orgs I've worked with, again, they're rarely 2x quota. But we're headed to a world where SDRs who can partner with the RevOps team, right? So I think that's the thing, is like, you shouldn't be at odds with your RevOps team. Like, your RevOps team is deploying a new tool to automate your day. You got to partner with them and give them that feedback. To Moss's point, maybe the tool is too clunky, or maybe it's too much effort to get that, to actually get the output compared to what pie in the sky was actually sold on. But if you can effectively scale your own output by 2x, 5x, 10x through automation, you're going to make a major impact, right? And I think that's where, if anyone's worried about being replaced by technology, I mean, this is how you make yourself irreplaceable, is to actually leverage all the tools and, you know, be someone that's actually generating a lot of revenue.
All right, we've got a case of too many tools. Tom says, what should I do if I have too many tools? There's a good case to use each system, but we don't have the resources to administrate the systems, train, support, etc. Where and how do you draw the line on existing and new tools?
Yeah, this is a very good question. When we are looking at the potential customers, we are trying to see if we are a replacement, if we are new, or a supplement for many other tools that they do have or currently using. And this is how we are trying to understand what is the value that the customers are trying to get from us, how they measure the ROI, and why we are a supplement and not the major tool that they are going to use. We are trying to replace existing tools by providing numbers, either money or time, but definitely on the each one of the companies, they need to assess the entire install base, the entire tech stack, and understand what can be replaced or on what they can give up, and focus on the tools that provide them the ROI that they are looking for.
Yeah, and Tom, having been on both sides of the aisle here when it comes to tool consolidation, there's two areas of thought of what your company is going to be, right? Bigger companies tend to look for all-in-one solutions. So you'll actually see them start migrating more of their deployments and the technologies that they had bought. They're going to shed them off, cut off a lot of vendors, and try to consolidate onto a single platform, ideally at a lower cost, right? This might be people who are Microsoft, people who are on Slack are going to have Microsoft Teams because it's bundled in, right? And so what you do want to do is you do want to make sure that if an existing vendor can replace another vendor as effectively, then it doesn't make sense to have that additional vendor. But what I also caution against is all-in-one solutions typically are not the best in class in everything that they're offering. So if the best in class that this vendor has is delivering significant output, and the change management and the support resources required to run it are low, definitely keep that. But you're going to have to go through that internally and understand how much training does it require? How much support does it require? Now, one thing that could be a massive decision criteria that I do now for every vendor I buy is that shouldn't be on my team to use their tool effectively. I lean heavily into CS of that vendor. So first off, are you using CS on them? Like, for example, if you have a new team come in and they all got to get trained up on, let's say, a specific tool, are you doing the training? And do you need to do the training, or can their CSM team run them through a training and get them up to speed? That's where you need to, of course, determine on a per tool basis. But I would always lean heavily on the actual vendors and see how they're able to actually deliver those resources. If they're not able to do so, and then internally you don't have those resources, then it's just shelfware. That's what you're essentially describing. And shelfware, should be, of course, removed so that you can get that money back.
And from the technical aspects, we need to look at the data flow, how the tools can integrate to each other, and how we don't have any breaking points in the middle. And if we do have, maybe we need to give up on this tool that do not complete the entire process.
Great perspective from external, but internally, who owns automation tools? Whose responsibility would you say it is to drive automation, and not just on sales teams? Like, is it per, vertical, per department? Should there be like an automation officer? Where do you guys stand on that?
So I actually just wrote an article on LinkedIn. If anyone wants to read it, it's really the rise of what I consider a chief automation officer. It might be too early for it, but I do believe 2023 will be a year where we're going to see a rise in a lot of RevOps roles, directors of RevOps, and really RevOps teams that comprise of different operational aspects. So you might actually have an HR/recruiting ops person who also might be the head of remote, who reports to the head of RevOps. You might have a RevOps team that's 100% focused on the SDR team, right? You might actually have an SDR ops person. Then you have your sales ops person. You might have your FinOps person. So all those revenue operations, should be driven by a coherent leader. And usually a really great COO is already going to do this today. But what we're seeing is that COOs, there's operational things that are beyond just the actual software that you're deploying. So it depends on the size of the org. Bigger orgs, I expect like a VP of RevOps to be the one that is working with these different teams to understand what resources to deploy. In smaller organizations, like the SDR managers, if there's not like a lot of ops resources, actually has to wear that hat. That's why I always tell, and I tell my own SDRs here, like, we will pay for your Salesforce certification. You want to go get admin certification? Like, we will pay for it. You want to get outreach admin certification? We will pay for it, right? Like we will do what's necessary, because that ends up being, a big blocker at, smaller organizations. And so, you'll actually need to take that on yourself. But if you do, you are going to be, you're far from being replaceable. If anything, your pay is going to jump up a lot if you have the ability to do both. So yeah, I think it just depends on the organization and what resources you have. If there's a defined leader, like they should be leading that with the managers. Outside of that, like it will fall on the IC's plate. But that's the opportunity. The opportunity is to learn this and actually have a chance to deploy.
Awesome. I want to go on the record and say I had no idea Terry wrote this article. It just so happened. That's great timing. So I did drop the link to that article.
I was like, interesting. Great.
Yeah, we're on the same wavelength. So I did drop the article in the chat if folks want to check that out. Gal, were you about to say something? I'm sorry.
No.
Oh, okay, great. We have a question from Sam. Sam, great to see you. With the economic downturn, have you seen SDR quotas and metrics goals change?
Definitely for outbound, we do see it. I mean, outbound, SDRs are being compensated more now for outbound. They do change the entire quota or the way that they get their bonuses. They do put more emphasis on outbound, and when SDR become kind of spoiled, getting all these leads, inbound leads, and it was easy. I do see companies that change the entire compensation plan or program or whatever they're going to decide, but yes, definitely.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. I mean, it also depends on the organization. There are some organizations that even with this downturn are still just on a rocket ship. And so their quotas will probably not go lower. But for organizations that have lowered forecasting for the year, so if let's say you had a $5 million quarterly forecast and you shifted that down to 3, and let's say your team size hasn't changed drastically, like the quotas can arguably be lower, right? And it's also reflective of the market. I've seen, for example, on outbound, as you mentioned, Gal, like a move to also quantify quality. So people moving away from your standard meeting quota to comping on points, which is like the quality of a meeting. Like, hey, how many actual users are at this account? If you have 10 or more users, it's 1.5. If it's over 20, it's 2, right? So like actually starting to drive the SDR's behavior to go after the accounts that are going to drive the most amount of revenue and comping them on that versus giving you 5 accounts that have 1 user each, right? Which technically could qualify under your current comp plan. So there are different ways to kind of address it, but yeah, in short, yes, definitely seeing that.
I think that's interesting, since I've been kind of like in the sales world for the last year. I've heard the quote repeated and seen on t-shirts and hats that like quota is quota, so I guess it's good to hear that we're kind of adjusting and adapting and really like being human, I would say. Okay, last call for questions, folks. Otherwise, I do have one last question for Terry and Gal. What are you guys excited about for this year? What has your attention? What are you looking forward to?
Want to go first, Gal?
From my point of view, obviously the change in focus outbound is definitely something that is coming back to us, and companies put more attention on the outbound processes. And I'm looking forward to see how this can impact the RightBound.
Yeah, similar. I think it's because your SDR managers and your leaders aren't in interviews every single day, right? Anyone that experienced the growth of the last 2 years, like you're sometimes in interviews and hiring than you were with your own team. Like this is actually a really exciting time to take a breath and look at your own internal teams and their processes. And you actually get to go back into the garden and pull out all the weeds. Like it's a breath of fresh air to actually have a chance to do that internally, but I'm seeing it across customers and prospects where, you know, they're finally looking back and saying, wow, like this entire time, for example, like we've just been relying on marketing leads, but like that well has dried up. So now we have to go do outbound. Or certain organizations are looking at their marketing programs and saying, hey, actually, like we can still drive a lot of quality inbound, but we actually have time to review all the marketing programs and we determined that, you know, this is where we need to reinvest. And so there's going to be a lot of change, but for organizations that are navigating through this time, like the most exciting thing is you actually get to sit down and make the change, right? And having time for change management, that rarely comes around.
Awesome. Well, I thank you guys so much for joining today. I think this was a great conversation. I sure learned a lot. Where can we find you? Where can people follow you? Where do you want to be found?
LinkedIn and my email I can put in the chat. Always open to having a conversation.
The same. And they say
Awesome.
you do have my email address.
Yes, it's here, I'll pop it in. It's gal@rightbound.io. Okay, thanks everybody for coming. The recording will be available very soon. I thank you all for coming. Hopefully you all enjoyed your lunch and your DoorDash gift cards. Make sure to follow RightBound and Orum on LinkedIn, and I'll see you guys at the next one.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.